They killed. They slaughtered. They showed no remorse. Until the lethal injection pierced their veins. February 2025, a month when death row doors swung open. One by one. Some met their fate with silent resignation. Others tried to justify their crimes. A few even smirked in the face of justice. But no matter what they said or did, there was no escaping the final sentence. What were their last meals? What were their final words? Did they truly regret their actions? Or were their last moments just another lie? Welcome to Crimes Unearthed 911, where we uncover the chilling true stories of crime and punishment. If you find this content engaging, share it so more people can see it. As always, because YouTube's algorithm favors videos with more likes and comments. If you enjoy this video, hit the like button and leave a comment below. And if you haven't yet subscribed, consider doing so you'll be the first to know when we release a new video. Now, let's dive into the final moments of death row inmates executed in February 2025. Richard Lee Tabler, Texas, February 13, 2025. Huntsville Prison, Texas. Richard Lee Tabler stepped into the execution chamber. No struggle, no tears, just a weary body awaiting its fate. After more than 20 years on death row, the day had come for him to pay for the crimes he had committed. Tabler wasn't an impulsive murderer. He planned ahead, cold, calculated, and ruthless. On November 26, 2004, he lured Muhammad Amin Ramouni, 25, a strip club manager, to a remote location under the pretense of selling him discounted sound equipment. Ramouni suspected nothing, so he arrived with his friend Haytham Zayed, 28. They had no idea they were walking into a death trap. As soon as they arrived, Tabler ambushed them, opened fire, and executed them both. But his killing spree didn't stop there. A few days later, Tabler murdered two young dancers from Ramouni's club, Tiffany Dotson, 18, and Amanda Benefield, 16. When he was caught, Tabler confessed without hesitation. But despite admitting to all four murders, he was only sentenced to death for the first two, the killings of Ramouni and Zayed. The murders of the two young dancers were never prosecuted. With his brutal crimes laid bare, the death sentence was inevitable. But even after receiving his sentence, Tabler wasn't done causing havoc. In 2008, while on death row, he smuggled a phone into his cell and used it to threaten Texas State Senator John Whitmire. His actions triggered one of the largest crackdowns on contraband in Texas prison history, leading to the seizure of hundreds of illegal cell phones from inmates across the state. Under Texas law, death row inmates are not granted a special last meal, and Tabler was no exception. No steak. No fries. No cake. Just a brightly lit execution chamber and a needle waiting to be inserted. When asked for his final words, Tabler didn't beg for mercy. Instead, he spoke slowly, his voice filled with regret. Not a day goes by that I don't regret my actions. I had no right to take their loved ones. And I ask and pray, I hope and pray that one day you find it in your hearts to forgive me for those actions. None of my apologies will bring them back. A final apology. But could remorse ever mean anything coming from a man who took 4 lives? 6:38 p.m. The lethal dose flowed into his veins. Minutes later, it was over. No one mourned him. The execution of Richard Lee Tabler closed a dark chapter. But for the families of his victims, the pain he inflicted will never fade away. James Dennis Ford, Florida. February 13, 2025, Florida State Prison. James Dennis Ford stepped into the execution chamber. No fear in his eyes. No pleas for mercy. He knew there was no escape. But before we talk about his final moments, let's go back nearly 3 decades, to the crime that sealed his fate. In April 1997, Greg and Kimberly Mallory received an invitation from James Dennis Ford, Greg's co-worker, for a weekend fishing trip at South Florida Side Farm. a young couple looking for a peaceful getaway. They had no reason to refuse. They didn't know they were walking into a trap. At the remote fishing site, Ford suddenly pulled out a gun. He shot Greg in the head, then attacked him with an axe to ensure he was dead. Kimberly tried to run, but Ford didn't let her get far. He assaulted her, raped her, then killed her in cold blood. But the horror didn't end there. Greg and Kimberly's 22-month-old daughter, Miranda, was still alive. Ford didn't kill her, but he also didn't care what happened to her. He left her locked inside their car, in the middle of nowhere, without food or water. For over 18 hours, she sat there, covered in her mother's blood, dehydrated, weak, and covered in insect bites. A child too young to speak, but her tiny body bore witness to it all. When Greg and Kimberly's bodies were discovered, police quickly identified Ford as the prime suspect. His fingerprints were at the crime scene. Blood evidence linked him directly to the murders. Witness testimony placed him with the victims before their deaths. When arrested, Ford showed no fear, no remorse. Instead, he denied everything, clinging to his innocence. But justice wasn't on his side. In 1999, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. He filed multiple appeals, but each one was denied. There would be no mercy for a man who slaughtered an entire family. Before his execution, Ford was allowed to request a last meal. He chose steak, macaroni and cheese, fried okra, sweet potatoes, pumpkin pie, and sweet tea. A hearty, comforting meal, but could he even taste it? When asked for his last words, Ford said nothing. No apologies, no justifications, no pleas for forgiveness. Instead, he simply wrote a note. Hugs, prayers, love. God bless you all. Kind words, but not for the people he murdered. A cold-blooded killer, and this was how he chose to leave the world? At 6:19 p.m., the lethal injection began. The drugs flowed into his veins. A few minutes later, it was over. No one mourned him. No one remembered him as anything other than a killer. But the pain he left behind will never be forgotten. Demetrius Terrence Frazier, Alabama. February 6, 2025, Holman Prison, Alabama. Demetrius Terrence Frazier entered the execution chamber. He didn't resist. He didn't fight back. But his eyes said everything: fear, regret, or maybe just quiet acceptance of his fate. Whatever it was, he couldn't escape justice. But before we talk about his final moments, let's go back to 1991, the year he committed his first crime. A crime so brutal, so inhumane, that no one could ever forgive him. On November 27, 1991, Pauline Starks Brown, 40, was asleep in her apartment in Birmingham, Alabama. It was a quiet night. She had no idea that a predator had just climbed through her window. Demetrius Terrence Frazier was inside. He woke Pauline up, pointed a gun straight at her face, and said, "Give me the money." But Pauline didn't have much cash in the house. That only made Frazier more violent. He assaulted her at gunpoint, terrorizing her without mercy. Pauline begged for her life, but it didn't matter. When he was done, he pulled the trigger. When police found Pauline, she was dead in her own bed. The one place she had always felt safe. But Frazier wasn't finished. A few months later, on March 8, 1992, in Detroit, Michigan, 14-year-old Crystal Kendrick was walking home from school. She didn't know that Frazier was following her. He dragged her into an abandoned house, covered her mouth, and tried to assault her. But Crystal wasn't like Pauline. She fought back. She scratched, struggled, and tried to escape. And that's what got her killed. Frazier pulled the trigger. Crystal collapsed, her blood pooling across the cold wooden floor. When Frazier was arrested, he confessed to everything. No remorse. No hesitation. as if taking lives meant nothing to him. In 1996, he was sentenced to death. In 2018, Alabama approved nitrogen hypoxia as a new execution method, a so-called less painful alternative. Frazier chose it. Years of appeals. All denied. Justice may be slow, but it always comes. Before his execution, Frazier requested a meal from Taco Bell. Burritos, Chalupa Supreme, crunchy beef taco, nacho fries with cheese dip, and Mountain Dew. A simple meal. A last meal. But did he even taste it? When asked for his final words, Frazier didn't argue, didn't make excuses, didn't shift the blame. He simply said, "First of all, I want to apologize to the friends and family of Pauline Brown. What happened to her should never have happened. I want to apologize." What is an apology worth, when the people he killed will never hear it? 6:36 p.m. The nitrogen gas filled his lungs. Frazier took a deep breath. 1 minute. 2 minutes. He went still. It was over. No one mourned him. No one missed him. But the pain he left behind will never fade. Marion Bowman Jr., South Carolina. January 31, 2025. Broad River Correctional Institution, South Carolina. Marion Bowman Jr., 44 years old, stepped into the execution chamber. The bright fluorescent lights cast a stark glow on his face, one that showed no emotion except quiet resignation. No more appeals. No more desperate attempts to escape fate. This time, justice had won. But before we talk about his final moments, let's go back 24 years to the crime that put him on death row. The night he brutally took the life of Candy Louise Martin. On February 16, 2001, Marion Bowman Jr., then 20, had a fateful encounter with Candy Louise Martin, 21. She wanted her money back, a debt Bowman had been avoiding. But instead of settling things peacefully, their conversation quickly escalated into a heated argument. Tension rose. Words were exchanged. And then Bowman uttered a sentence that would later be remembered as a chilling prophecy. "You'll be dead before the night is over." It wasn't just an empty threat. That night, Bowman lured Candy to a secluded wooded area, armed with a gun. Blinded by rage, he fired multiple rounds, each shot ripping away her chance at life. But murder wasn't enough. He dragged her body into the trunk of his car and drove to a remote location. There, he doused the vehicle in gasoline and set it ablaze, trying to erase every trace of his crime. Bowman thought he had gotten away with it. But justice never forgets. The smallest details gave him away. The murder weapon was found in a nearby river. Ballistics matched it to the crime. DNA from Candy's remains was linked to Bowman. His own cousin, James Tywin Gadsden, testified against him, confirming the murder was premeditated. By 2002, Bowman was sentenced to death. For 23 years, he insisted he was innocent. He claimed the evidence was tampered with, that racial bias played a role in his conviction, that he didn't deserve to die. Every appeal was denied. Before his execution, Bowman was given the option of a last meal, and he didn't hold back. He requested fried shrimp, fish, and oysters, crispy chicken wings and fried chicken, French fries and onion rings, banana pudding, German chocolate cake, and cranberry pineapple juice. A feast fit for a king. But did he even taste it? When asked for his last words, Bowman didn't show anger. He didn't resist. His voice was calm as he said, "Death row inmates may be labeled as the worst, but we've all changed since that moment that cost us everything. I know Candy's family suffers and rightfully so. They're angry. If my death brings them some relief, then I guess it will have served some purpose. I hope they find peace." True remorse? Or just a final attempt to be remembered as something other than a murderer? Only he knew the answer. 6:42 p.m. The lethal injection began to flow into his veins. His eyes slowly shut. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 3 minutes. His breathing became shallow. Then, nothing. 7:04 p.m. Marion Bowman Jr. was pronounced dead. No one wept for him. No one mourned him. But the death of Candy Louise Martin, the young woman who only wanted what was hers, will never be forgotten. Stephen Lawayne Nelson, Texas. February 5, 2025, Huntsville Prison, Texas. Stephen Lawayne Nelson, 37 years old, stepped into the execution chamber. No struggle. No tears. He faced his fate without fear. But before we talk about his final moments, let's go back 14 years to the crime that sealed his fate. The night he turned a sacred church into a crime scene. On March 3, 2011, Stephen Lawayne Nelson, then 24, broke into North Point Baptist Church in Arlington, Texas. His goal was simple: robbery. Inside, Pastor Clint Dobson, 28, and Church Secretary Judy Elliott, 67, were alone, two kind-hearted people who had no idea they were about to face a ruthless killer. Nelson didn't just want to rob them. He wanted to make sure there were no witnesses. He strangled Pastor Dobson with a computer cable, then wrapped a plastic bag over his head to make sure he was dead. Judy Elliott was beaten so severely that she suffered critical injuries but miraculously survived. Afterward, Nelson stole Dobson's laptop, Elliott's credit card, and her car before fleeing. He thought he had erased every trace of his crime. But he made one fatal mistake. His fingerprints were found at the scene. Blood on his shoes matched Pastor Dobson's. Surveillance footage and credit card records showed Nelson using Elliott's stolen car to buy clothes and jewelry shortly after the crime. Just 1 week later, police arrested Nelson. In court, he denied everything, blaming 2 other men. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. It didn't take long for the jury to decide. Nelson was sentenced to death for first-degree murder, robbery, and aggravated assault. Under Texas law, death row inmates do not receive a special last meal. No steak. No fries. No cake. Just a brightly lit execution chamber and a syringe waiting to be used. When asked for his final words, Nelson showed no fear. He looked at his wife, smiled, and said, "I'm not afraid. I'm at peace. Let's ride." No apologies. No remorse. 6:50 p.m. The lethal injection began flowing into his veins. He trembled slightly. Minutes later, his body went still. Pastor Clint Dobson's family didn't show hatred toward Nelson. They didn't even attend his execution. They only had one statement: "We don't want to remember him. We want to remember Clint, a man who dedicated his life to helping others." Justice had been served. But the pain Nelson left behind will never fade. These killers met their rightful end. But the real question remains: did they truly feel remorse? Or was it all an act? Were their final words meaningful? Or just a last attempt at redemption? No matter what, the pain they inflicted on their victims' families will never go away. Justice has been carried out, but the memory of these crimes will live on. What do you think about these executions? Did any of them deserve forgiveness? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this content valuable, share it so more people can see it. As always, YouTube favors videos with more likes and comments. So if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and leave a comment. And if you haven't subscribed to Crimes Unearthed 911, consider subscribing so you never miss our next story. Thank you for watching. See you in the next episode.